Going to go ahead and get started. Thanks again for joining. For today's briefing, we have state employment economist Gail Krumenauer, who is joined by Paid Leave Oregon Director Karen Madeline Hubblebaugh. A couple of quick reminders. This call is being recorded and we will post the recording online and send it out the link to everyone who RSVP'd after the briefing. We'll take questions after opening remarks from Gail and Karen. And if you have any technical difficulties or are otherwise unable to ask your question, please send an email to communications@employ.oregon.gov and we'll be happy to assist you. I will now turn it over to state employment economist Gail Krumenauer, who will make some brief remarks regarding Oregon economic data for November. She is followed by Paid Leave Oregon Director Karen Madden Hubblebaugh, who will make remarks about Paid Leave Oregon and the contributions beginning January 1st. So please go ahead, Gail.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. This morning, the Employment Department released the jobs numbers and the unemployment rate for Oregon in November. Oregon employers added 8,500 jobs to non-farm payrolls, and the unemployment rate rose to 4.4%. Several sectors of Oregon's economy had large job gains in November. Local government added 1,700 jobs over the month, and that was mostly due to public K-12 and public higher education adding workers. Private healthcare and social assistance had its 11th consecutive month of job gains, adding 1,400 in November. Wholesale trade expanded by 1,100 jobs, and leisure and hospitality, which is Oregon's hotels, restaurants, bars, and entertainment places, they added 1,000 jobs in November. No broad sector of Oregon's economy had large job losses in November. Oregon's unemployment rate rose from 4.1% in October to 4.4% in November. That's different than what we saw for the US, where the unemployment rate remained stable at 3.7% in both October and November. Oregon's unemployment rate has been on the rise in recent months, increasing from 3.5% in July to 4.4% in November. And I wanted to take a second to just unpack what's going on underneath that unemployment rate. We have Oregon's overall labor force, and then there's the part of the labor force that's employed and the part that's unemployed. So overall, the size of Oregon's labor force has changed very little in the past few months. What we're seeing is that employment reported by people living in households in Oregon has dropped a bit in recent months. And a big piece of that drop is self-employment, which was trending up strongly in 2020 and in 2021. So we're seeing a bit of a reversal in that now, where self-employment has been declining for the past few months. The number of unemployed Oregonians has also ticked up recently. Interestingly, though, nearly 2/3 of all unemployed Oregonians in November belong to kind of one of two broad groups. The first one would be people who had newly entered the labor force, new entrants who had just started searching for a job, but not yet found one or started it. And then the second is those who were unemployed because they had quit or otherwise left their job without having another one lined up already. So those two kind of broad groups make up about 2/3 of unemployed Oregonians in November. The third kind of broad group is those who are unemployed because they lost their job due to a layoff. And that's risen slightly in recent months, but remains close to the lowest level we've seen since the late 1970s. So to put it all in context, we're continuing to see strong job growth. Oregon employers added nearly 80,000 jobs to non-farm payrolls over the past year. And while we've seen unemployment rise in recent months, at 4.4%, Oregon's unemployment rate is still low by historical standards. With that, I will turn it over to Paid Leave Oregon Director Karen Hubblebaugh for more updates. Thank you.
Thanks, Gail. I'm Karen Hubblebaugh. I'm the Director of Paid Leave Oregon, and I'm here today to talk to you about an important date, January 1st. January 1st is when employees will start seeing deductions from their paychecks for Paid Leave Oregon. As a reminder, Paid Leave Oregon is a new program that helps working people and employers throughout Oregon. Paid leave allows employees in Oregon to take up to 12 weeks of paid leave off per benefit year for family leave, medical leave, and safe leave. All employees, regardless of the size of their employer, pay into the paid leave program starting in January. The contribution rate for 2023 is 60% of 1% of gross wages. For example, for $5,000 in gross wages, the employee would pay $30. Large employers with 25 or more employees pay 40% of that 1% contribution. For that same example of $5,000 in an employee's gross wages, the large employer would pay $20. Small employers with fewer than 25 employees need to collect and submit employee payments. However, small employers are not required to contribute to the employer portion of the contribution, but if they choose to do so, assistance grants are available. These employee and employer contributions will go into the Paid Leave Trust Fund, the same trust fund that will pay for people's benefits starting later this year. Employees in Oregon can start applying for Paid Leave Oregon benefits in September of 2023. Employees on paid leave will receive a weekly amount, and some of them will get 100% of their wages. For those who have been in their position for 90 days or more, their jobs are protected by law while they're out on paid leave. We want to get the word out that contributions are coming in just a little over 2 weeks and make sure that both employers and employees are prepared. We have an employer toolkit on our website with all of the necessary resources and a lot of information for employees as well. Thank you all for helping us get the word out about this important program, and we're happy to answer any questions or schedule an interview. With that, I'll turn it over to Rebecca for the question and answer portion of the briefing.
Thanks, Karen. We're now opening the lines to members of the media to ask questions. Please make sure to state to whom you are directing your question, Karen or Gail. Please limit yourself to one question and one follow-up question. If you're joining us by phone, please make sure to hit *6 to unmute yourself. And again, if you don't get your question answered or if you think of something later, you can always email us at communications@employ.oregon.gov, and we're happy to track that answer down for you. So the first reporter up with RSVP for today's conference is Kate Davidson with OPB. So let's get her. There you go.
Hi, thanks for, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for Gail, but if there's time to ask a second question later on, I would love to ask Karen a question too. Gail, I'm just wondering, this may seem like a naive question because the recession was so pronounced, when the pandemic hit, but as state economists look towards a mild recession in the next week, what are the employment indicators or the signs that you would see that that's beginning to hit Oregon's workforce?
Thanks, Kate. That's a great question. And we have seen that Oregon's Office of Economic Analysis is forecasting a mild recession to start in the middle of 2023, so in the middle of next year. And there's several signs that we've been tracking to see how the health of Oregon's economy and the US economy looks. And one of the things that we track is job growth. One of the hallmarks of a recession is sustained job losses or very severe job losses. As we saw in the last recession, they weren't so long, but they were quite intense. So currently, I was just saying, we've seen strong job growth. We saw strong job growth in 2021. We've seen it continuing throughout 2022 as well. So that's not consistent with what we would expect to see for a recession. We're also, as of November, as a recession, we're also tracking unemployment insurance claims. Those have risen slightly, but are still at really low rates, on par with 2019, which was another time when we were, at or near record low unemployment. Another thing that I follow closely is the number of job openings. And we've seen that Oregon employers have had roughly 100,000 job openings, and that's just private employers. At any given time over about the past year and a half, there are still more job openings than there are unemployed workers in Oregon. Typically, when we see an economic downturn, we see those job openings fall off, and they're still running pretty close to record highs. There are other things to track as well, such as gross domestic product. And in the most current quarter, that has turned up again, was positive in the third quarter of the year after 2 declines. So we're seeing a lot of things that I'm following that aren't consistent with a recession as of November. Again, we are keeping an eye on everything as OEA is forecasting that we could be looking at a mild recession in the middle of the next year.
Thanks.
Did you have a follow-up question, Kate?
Oh, if I'm allowed to ask 2 questions.
Yes.
This one is actually for Karen. I've been curious with the rollout of paid leave Oregon, whether your research into what other states have done with their paid leave programs has unearthed anything that we would want to be mindful of going forward in terms of how employers might react in terms of possibly limiting, paid time off for their employees in response to the availability of the program, or what other states have experienced with the health of their trust funds, the sort of things that you'll be keeping an eye on as the program rolls out later next year.
Yeah, thanks for that. We have seen just the beginnings of some data from other states that have implemented. This is fairly new, even for the other jurisdictions that have implemented across the country in those sibling states that you're referencing. There have not been any studies that I have seen that show that companies are changing their benefits plans or anything because of the paid leave programs in other states. In terms of the trust, this is something we do have an eye on, of course. We have been watching the trust in other states, in particular with Washington State that has a lot of similarities with us. And we do, I think one of the very first hires that we had here at Paid Leave was to hire an actuary. And so we are making sure that we look at and update quarterly all of the data that we have to make sure that that trust is healthy and that we can meet all of those statutory responsibilities that we have.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next to have their hand raised, I see is Peter Wong with Pamplin Media. Peter, go ahead. Looks like you're still muted, Peter.
Okay, and can you hear
There
me
you
now?
go.
Oh,
Yes.
Gail, to follow up on Kate's question, how does this data dovetail with the Federal Reserve policy and their guidelines for when they obviously are they considering raising interest rates again? And I think that part's a given. We just don't know how much. But job growth may be slowing, but it's certainly in Oregon, it's still, the indicator is still up. And although I know you haven't taken your fourth quarter survey yet on job openings, that kind of remains, that figure remains high as well in terms of the unfilled jobs. I also know about the OEA projections as well, but anyway, how does this dovetail with the Fed's policies?
Thank you, Peter. We see a lot of the same thing happening in Oregon that we've seen across the country, where we still have this really high level of job openings. And that's similar for Oregon as it is to the US. It's off of those really record highs, but it's not too far off of them. Just for reference, prior to the pandemic recession, the largest number of job openings we'd seen in Oregon was about 67,000 in the summer of 2017. So to be up around 100,000 for such a long period of time. And similarly, the US has been in between 10 and 11 million for an extended period of time job openings. That is something that the Federal Reserve has been actively discussing in terms of needing to bring more balance into the labor market, where they're trying to raise rates and curb consumer spending in a way that brings down some of those job openings and makes the labor market a little less tight. So I think that we haven't seen it come down significantly in Oregon. And while it has come down a bit from the top in the US, it's not down to where the Fed thinks it should be yet. And I think we're going to see that reflected in, I believe, an anticipated rate hike being announced today. So I think it stands where we're starting to see it loosen up a little bit, but not nearly like it was before the pandemic recession.
I have one more for Gail. Karen and I haven't forgotten about your program, and we are transitioning to a new content management system. So maybe if I write it just once, it'll take, so you can assure Angela that her request for me to do something didn't fall on deaf ears. Plus, this would be the perfect time of year for me to do that, as well as your own program, since it's starting up January 1. My
Thank you.
second question, Gail, was I noticed government hiring is up. It was a little lagging in the first couple, in the couple prior months, but I think you said something about schools not having done it. And now I guess we are seeing that schools have increased their hiring a little bit, and as well as government as a whole. So
Yeah, yes, to that point, we have seen some kind of larger declines and gains in recent months compared to what we would typically expect to happen this time of year for schools. And I like to take it as not just 1 month for that, because it's such a highly seasonal industry, and it can depend upon the timing of the start of the school year, how hard it is to find enough workers to fill all of their jobs, right when schools are opening and things like that. So kind of on the whole, I am looking at local government, and particularly a lot of the movement that's been happening in government has been in local government and specifically in public education. So I've been kind of taking a look at that as a whole and comparing it to where we were in 2019. And we can see that local government education is getting closer to where it was, but it still hasn't recovered to its pre-pandemic employment levels for this time of year.
okay, thank you.
Okay, now we're going to open it up for Julia Shumway with the Oregon Capitol Chronicle. Go ahead, Julia.
All right, can you hear me now okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this is a question for Gail. Could you explain some of the factors that might go into Oregon having a higher unemployment rate than the national average, and why our unemployment rate has been ticking up while the national average has stayed pretty constant over the past few months?
Thanks for the question, Julia. Well, as I mentioned earlier in my prepared comments, that one of the things we've seen in Oregon, and we've seen this nationally as well, is self-employment has become a larger share of the overall labor force, the way that people either choose to or need to work in Oregon's economy. And so we've seen that grow from about 5.5% of the overall labor force to self-employment, topping out at about 8% of the labor force a few months ago. Now we've seen that turn down. And so that's something that is maybe not as pronounced for the US. We have seen that run up in self-employment for the US as well, but we're seeing kind of a turn in that in recent months. And I think that's something that has been a difference for us in terms of driving the overall unemployment rate. That's been, one of the biggest factors that I've seen. In terms of other things that might be happening as well is we often think about, again, the unemployment rate is based on who lives in households that are in Oregon, regardless of where they work. So there could also be some effects to those folks who live in Oregon but work for companies that are based elsewhere. And we're not entirely sure if they're seeing any different trends at all. But I do know that Oregon is one of the top states in terms of working from home and remote work possibilities, both prior to the pandemic and during the pandemic period. So that's something that could have an impact on Oregon workers, perhaps a little bit differently than the US as well.
Thanks so much.
Did you have any follow-up questions, Julia?
No, that was it.
Okay, great. So next I'm going to open it up for Bill Poehler with the Statesman Journal.
Yeah, hey, questions for Karen. You were talking about how the program people can't start applying until September of 2023. Wondering why that is.
Yeah, thanks for that. This is a good question. Contributions start to come out of our paychecks on January 1st, as I mentioned, and then benefits begin to be paid out in September. And the reason why is we need to build up that state trust fund. So we need that time between January and September to build up a couple quarters worth of contributions, so that come September, we'll be able to pay the benefits to those folks who apply and are eligible.
Okay, and I guess the other thing that makes sense. The other thing I was thinking about was because the employers that have more than 2,500 employers that have more than 2,500 employees pay the 40%. Does that include companies that have 2,500 employees throughout their whole company, even if it's like outside of the state, or is this just counting the number of employees they have in the state of Oregon?
Yeah, employee count is all employees for the company. And so if a company has 2 employees in Oregon and 200 employees in New Jersey, they would be considered a large employer, because a large employer for paid leave purposes is 25 or more employees.
Okay, sorry. Okay, cool. That makes more sense. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Okay, I do not see any more hands. So we'll go ahead and bring this media briefing to a close. As a reminder, this call was recorded and we will send it out, the link to all of the reporters who RSVP'd. We will also post it on our media page at unemployment.oregon.gov. Thank you for everyone who participated today. We really appreciate you getting the word out about our very important programs for the people of Oregon. And I hope you have a good holiday season. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.